Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Just continuing on with the previous video that I made about this gearbox and cleaning it and all the bits and stuff that I was talking about there. Two of the things that make these gearboxes shift poorly are the shift cassette, which is this thing here, which is currently almost back together, but I'm just going to show you a couple of things there. And the shimming of the end float of the shafts within the gearbox. It's a funny thing, you know. I was talking to somebody today who had a fair bit to do with Joe Eastmuir, who had some success with BMWs in the Castrol 6 hours, and you know, those bikes that they were racing then were production bikes, and they struck some issues with being disqualified for the slightest variation from spec. And I kind of wonder how that could be, because these bikes are built to tolerances. The gearboxes are built by Getrag, probably assembled by unskilled labour, really. In the scheme of things, they probably wouldn't know normally how to fix or fit a gearbox, and they're built within clearances and tolerances. I've found some pretty wild shimming attempts in gearboxes. I've only had this shop running for 2 years, but I've been tied up with Michael Schneering for the best part of 15 or 16 years. And I watched and helped him build gearboxes for probably 8 or 9 of those years before I attempted to build one myself. It's not because they're that complicated, it's just because they're a little bit like a clock. You really have to understand them. And he once said to me, you'll know you can build a gearbox if I give you a box of cogs and bits, and you can assemble that box of bits without referring to a manual. Well, I guess if that makes you an expert, then I'm probably about 85% there, but they still trick me from time to time. One of the things that goes wrong here is in manufacture, the tolerances cause things to not work as well as they should, and they're a fairly agricultural and basic gearbox anyway. So what I have been shown to do, and what I do religiously when I rebuild a gearbox, is I pay a great deal of attention to the shimming of the end floats, try and get them all down to their minimum tolerance in manufacture, and try and keep them all as close to being the same as I possibly can. That is a bit of a mission. And this bloomin' shift cassette. Now, this bike here, the reason I'm doing this particular video, I wish now that I had kept a rough video that I made just for my own benefit about the things that were wrong with this. But this is the shift pawl. This is the thing that breaks. That little spring there breaks and lets this fall away. Now, it doesn't sit up against that post. This gear goes over that post, turned over this way. And it's one of the shift cam wheels, the one that carries the detents. So this first gear, neutral, second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear, and it runs around on a cog. There's a corresponding gear here that meshes with that one. It's timed. And these cutouts move the shift forks up and down and in and out of connection. The shift forks go into the sliding dogs on the gearbox, and all of the sliding dogs, generally speaking, are fixed gears. So they're splined. They don't freewheel. They're a splined gear. So I'm trying to do this all in one go. So that's a shift dog there, right? It's on a spline. It's positively driven by the turning of the spline. So is that one there. So is this one here on the intermediate shaft. So there are 3 sliding dogs in this constant mesh sliding dog gearbox. It's constant mesh because of what I explained in the previous video. And these cams cause the shift forks, which I showed you earlier, they're polished now, and all the little marks and nicks have been polished out of them. And everything is as close to the original tolerances as I can get. But this particular box must have been made on a Friday by a guy with a hangover, ready to go out drinking again, because everything that could be touching in it was. If I take that off, you'll see here I've gone around the shift pawl on this, and I do it on all of them. I've taken all the sharp edges off. This was already shiny. It had a big shiny welt through here, deep enough so that it had some scratches in it. I take all the sharp edges off this pressed steel pawl and polish them so that they will slip and slide over the gears, because what was happening, it was touching underneath on the inside of this thing here. It wasn't bent, funnily enough. It just had a bit of a ridge in it that touched on that, and it had worn a bit of a groove in the back. We managed to polish it out. Then none of these clearances are huge, but they're there. This shiny bit that you can see on the gear here, when they punched this cam out, they must have punched it a bit strange, because the bottom of these cutouts had little tiny lumps on them, little press lumps. And they were all touching on the underside, on the top side of this pawl. They had worn a little track in through here, which we polished out and linished out. So I never rode this bike. It's out of a very late series R80 GS, and I would have imagined that it would have shifted like an absolute bag of bolts with all the things that were going on. So hopefully when the owner gets it back, he'll have quite a wonderful surprise. All the springs are replaced. The shift pawl spring is the one that holds this in engagement into those little gears there, and that pulls and pushes this gear around, and that is tied to the second gear, and that is how those shift forks move up and down and engage those driven dogs into and out of free running gears to engage the various ratios as they go up. I hope I've done some kind of a job. Gearboxes are white man's magic, and they're very hard to explain, and I hope that you get some little benefit from these videos. Stay well, ride safely until we meet again.